Mirë se erdhët në Public Square, unë jam Ditmir Bushati. Si mund të organizohet jeta ekonomike, politike dhe shoqërore në kushtet e zhvillimit vrullshëm teknologjik? Apo jetojmë në një periudhë të re të kapitalizmit, apo mos ndoshta kemi hyrë në periudhën e tekno-feudalizimit, ku tregu i dikurshëm është zëvendësuar nga platforma digjitale dhe ku përfitimi i dikurshëm është zëvendësuar nga qërat përmes cilave funksionojnë këto platforma digjitale. Cila është sjellja njerëzore në raport me këtë situatë të re që jetojmë? Po roli shteteve, roli organizatave ndërkombëtare, i kompanive të mëdha. Si ndikon tekno-feudalizmi në ambientin e ri gjeopolitik që po jetojmë? Jo vetëm për nga konkurenca mes Shtetit Bashkuar të Amerikës nga një anë dhe Kinës nga ana tjetër, por edhe në kushtet e një mjedisi të ri të sigurisë në radh parë në Europë, por edhe në lindjet mesme. Cilat janë raportet që tekno-feudalizmi po përcakton mes vendeve të jugut global dhe pjesës tjetër të botës? Cilat janë raportet ndërmjet Europës veriore dhe Europës jugore ku edhe ne bëjmë pjesë? Çfarë mund bëhet më mirë në këtë drejtim për të korrur frytet e këtij zhvillimit vrullshëm teknologjik dhe për të zvogluar apo reduktuar pasiguritë dhe ndasitë e mëdha që ekzistojnë dhe pabarazitë e mëdha që ekzistojnë? Për gjitha këto, sot do të flas me Yanis Varoufakis, ish ministër i financave të Greqisë, sekretar i përgjithshëm i Lëvizjes për Demokraci në Europë dhe një autor i shumë librave për kapitalizmin dhe teknologjinë. Welcome to Public Square, Yanis. It's a pleasure to have you.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you for having me.
A few years ago, you wrote a book about the essence of capitalism, where you basically answered the questions of your daughters about inequality and why there is so much inequality. Recently, you have published a book about tekno-feudalism, which is killing capitalism. According to your viewpoint, market is being replaced by digital trading platform and the profit is being replaced by the rent. Can you elaborate a little bit more the implications in economic and political terms of this situation?
Well, thank you for the opportunity of doing this. To begin with, when I'm saying that capitalism is already dead, that sounds like a preposterous claim, because wherever we look at, we see, we see capital triumphing. But that's not inconsistent with my thesis. It all depends on how do you define capitalism, doesn't it? From my perspective, a very simple way of looking at capitalism is as a socioeconomic mode of production, a system which relies on two pylons, two foundations. One is markets, where all economic activity happens through markets. That wasn't the case under feudalism or any kind of society before capitalism. And the other is that rents have given their place to profit. So instead of the feudal lord coming in and taking part of the harvest at the end of the harvest season, you have entrepreneurs who employ different factors of production, labor, capital, and so on, land, and then they retain their profits. Profit was the fuel, markets was the space in which all economic activity took place under capitalism. Okay. Now, the moment you enter one of these great digital trading platforms, whether it's Amazon.com or Alibaba or Uber or Airbnb, or indeed any kind of digital platform which is driven by data accumulated by Google, by Apple, and so on. The moment you enter, I'll stick to Amazon.com because it's a good example. The moment you enter Amazon.com, you've exited capitalism, because Amazon.com is not a market. It looks like a market because there are lots of buyers and lots of sellers in it. But if you think about it, the algorithm takes you, knows a great deal about you, it has huge knowledge of you. That's why its recommendations about books, about this, the other are so good, because it knows you. So you've trained the algorithm to train the algorithm to know you really very well. That algorithm knows sellers as well, perfectly well, in the same way. So it matches a buyer and a seller, okay, in ways that nobody understands except the person who owns the algorithm. And it matches a buyer and the seller with a view to maximizing the rent it charges the seller for selling you anything, an electric bicycle, a book, a record, whatever. Up to 40% is retained by Jeff Bezos, the owner of this algorithm. That algorithm, of course, is a kind of capital because it doesn't live in the cloud. I call it cloud capital, but it's on Earth. It's in server farms, in optic fiber cables, cell towers, and so on. Essentially, you've got a new form of capital, which I call cloud capital, which can do the following things all at once. It can arrest your attention in a way that television programs used to do. Secondly, it can put ideas into your mind about what you want in a way that advertisers used to do. But now, it's a two-way dialectical process. It's infinite. It trains you to train it, to train you to train it, to train you to train it, to do this to your mind, right? It's not like, a television advertisement, which is one way it comes to you. The third thing it does is through your own activities as a user, you are producing labor that is not getting paid, labor with which you replenish and reproduce the cloud capital of that algorithm. In the end, what happens is that the owner of that cloud capital is using your free labor in order to maximize his power to charge 40% of the price of the thing that it convinces you to buy, and also it sells it to you directly by bypassing any market. Amazon convinces you to buy something and sells it to you. And in the Amazon warehouse, where this is being packed and posted, the workers, the proletarians who are working in there, wage labor, are driven with a digital device which is on their wrist by the same algorithm to work faster, and their labor is being monitored. My simple point is that, folks, this is no longer capitalism. It is founded on a super powerful form of mutant capital, which I call cloud capital, but it is a new kind of techno-feudalism because the platform in which all this trading takes place is a kind of digital fiefdom owned by one feudal lord, techno-feudal lord, who charges rent just like the feudal lords used to, except that this time his power does not come from inheritance. He's not just the son of the owner of the land. He has used immense amounts of capital and money to invest in the digital technologies that render him a kind of techno-feudal lord. And finally, and this long answer to your very good question, most of that money comes from central banks. 9 out of every $10 that has been spent in order to produce this magnificent cloud capital comes from our central banks following the 2008 great financial collapse. This is a new world. It's not capitalism as we have known it.
So basically what you are saying is that cloud capital has engineered and monetized our behavior. And so basically we're in this brutal race for clicks, for datas. And my question is, how is this being related to the individual liberals? So how to protect the fence of individual liberals in this ecosystem or in this new world that has been created?
Oh, it's too late. It's gone. The fence is gone. If you don't need to be just, I'm a left-winger. I come from the Marxist tradition. But it's not just for us leftists to despair at what is going on. Liberals should be up in arms about the destruction, the murder of the liberal individual. But let me take it a bit further. Very rightly, you focused on behavioral modification because you see, the profound difference between cloud capital and former kinds of capital, traditional capital, is traditional capital, whether it's old, like steam engines or tractors, or today, very advanced industrial robots. These are all terrestrial, old-fashioned forms of capital because they are produced means of production. They are machines that humans have produced to produce other stuff. That's capital as we understood it. Produced means of production. But, the algorithms that live in your phone, AI, all these infrastructure, which is real physical infrastructure, right? Huge server farms. This, what I call cloud capital, is not a produced means of production, is a produced means of behavioral modification. Anyone who owns that capital has the capacity to modify our behavior. And it is a two-way dialectical. You see, Henry Ford, General Electric, Coca-Cola, McDonald's always had access to very gifted advertisers who modified our behavior. They instilled in our mind desires which we didn't have. They made us want things we didn't really want. That was a great power. But these were human beings. And because they were human beings, it was a one-way process. So a great advertiser would come up with a McDonald's advertisement that you would see and you think, I want a Big Mac, right? But then you had to go to the shop, to the McDonald's shop to actually get it. And it was the end of the story. The advertisement went from the television screen or the poster to your head. And from there, you went to the McDonald's shop and you bought the stuff. End of story. Now, it's an infinite two-way process. The machine, right, influences you to influence it, to influence you better, to influence it, to influence you even better, and so on, to modify your behavior. Anyone who has this power, owns this capital, is immensely more powerful than Henry Ford or McDonald's or Coca-Cola ever were, right? And the important thing is that the owners of this cloud capital don't work for capitalists anymore. You know, if you were a good advertiser, such and such, right? You worked for a capitalist. You had a client who was a capitalist. And you helped the capitalist increase demand for the capitalist's good. But now, if you're Bezos, you don't work for any capitalist. You don't need any deal with any capitalist. You actually are the Lord. You have vassals as capitalists. They are coming to you and they are paying up to 40% of whatever it is that they receive from consumers. And at the same time, all consumers are also producers of their cloud capital. Because every time you go into Amazon.com, you are replenishing the capital stock of the cloud capital of Jeff Bezos. Every review you post on Amazon for a book or for any product, likes, whatever, adds to their capital stock. So everybody's working for those techno-feudal lords. That's why I'm saying that it doesn't help to think of this system today as capitalism anymore. That's why I ditched the word capitalism, which I know is very, very hard for people to do. And going back to your question about the liberal individual, you see, and I say I try to explain this in the book. Liberals used to think that the importance about markets and about capitalism, the reason why they defended capitalism, was because for them the market was the realm of freedom. You could you were a sovereign consumer, so you wanted a Coca-Cola. That's it. Nobody had the right to tell you that you didn't want a Coca-Cola, right? Your desires were sovereign. Okay, maybe you were influenced by advertisements, but in the end, you decided what you wanted, and you could sell and buy whatever your wallet allowed you. So, if you wanted to buy to sell your labor, you did so. You spent 8 hours working in an office or in a warehouse or in a supermarket, in a factory. And then at the end of that day, at the end of those 8 hours, you were working for yourself. You had leisure. You had the capacity to expand your own horizons, to read books, to whatever. Well, today, that is no longer the case. And it is no longer the case because take youngsters, young people. I've always been an academic all my life. That was disrupted, unfortunately, by politics. But nevertheless, I still think as a professor. And I've noticed this fundamental change in the way students, young people behave and think. Because now, when they go to an interview for a job, they know that the panel, sometimes now the panel is made of algorithms, right? It's algorithms that interview students or, prospective employees. There's AI interviewing now as a first filter of candidates. Right? So whether it's AI or human beings, the first thing they do is they look at your social media profile, your Facebook pages, what you posted on Instagram, TikTok, your tweets, everything gets summed up or sums you up. So in other words, youngsters, even when they are at home in the middle of the night, posting something on TikTok, they know at the back of their mind that they are going to be judged on the basis of what they are posting. Even if it's not conscious, it's subconscious. So there is no delineation, no fence separating work from pleasure. They live under the constant angst of creating a personality which will be acceptable and desirable by Google, by Facebook, by the owners, the techno-feudal lords, the cloudalists, as I call them in the book, right? When it comes to work, we know that because even from the beginning with email, there is no strict separation between work time and leisure time. So that fence that liberals valued and for which they were prepared to support capitalism as a freedom-enhancing system, that is gone.
How is techno-feudalism evolving under the present geopolitical circumstances? You mentioned that most of the capital is being given by central banks, and we know this techno competition between US and China, but there are all these hotspots in the Middle East, in Europe, everywhere. So how is this going to be seen or to be developed in these new geopolitical circumstances, according to your view?
With techno-feudalism, we have two destabilizing forces at once. The first one is, if I'm right in my hypothesis that profit is being replaced by cloud rent, if you look at the fact that compare and contrast General Motors or Volkswagen on the one hand and Facebook on the other. Old-fashioned companies like Volkswagen and General Motors pay 85% of their revenues to workers as salaries. Workers and managers and top managers, they get 85% approximately of a large corporations, old-fashioned corporations' monies, salaries, revenues. Facebook pays less than 1%. Less than 1%. So all this wealth, all this cloud rent is taken out of the circular flow of income in the United States, in Germany, in France, everywhere. Which means that aggregate demand is very low, which means the system is more unstable in the global north. In the global north is more unstable. That instability fuels the tendency to try to do two things. Make the central bank produce more money in order to replenish the lost aggregate demand, and imperialism, finding more markets again. That's one force. That's why techno-feudalism is not good for geostrategic peace, right? But a major, major threat to international peace. So my hypothesis in the book is that the US-Chinese New Cold War is because you have a major clash between two fiefdoms made of cloud capital, American cloud capital and Chinese cloud capital. And with the war in Ukraine, which has caused Saudi Arabians, Indonesians, Pakistanis, various moneyed people to have serious angst about what happens to their dollars because they saw that the Russian dollars could be confiscated by the Americans and the Europeans. Well, if you're Saudi Arabian and you're, a money bags from one of the Emirates, you think, okay, this is not looking very good because today they're cross with Putin and his men. Tomorrow they'll be cross with me. God knows what happens. So, an increasing, not very large, but increasing proportion of world payments are now being shifted to the Chinese payment system, the digital payment system, both of WeChat and the Central Bank of China. And that is a real danger for American hegemony, because the only reason why the United States remain hegemonic, given that they are in the red, increasingly the United States since 1971 are in the red, in the sense that they have a trade deficit and a budget deficit. The only reason why they are combining those deficits with increasing hegemony is because everybody is using the dollar system. So if the Chinese cloud capital and cloud finance together provide an alternative to the dollar payment system, that is it's a clear and present danger for the United States. And that, for me, explains the new Cold War between the United States and China.
In the past, capitalism has been restrained by social democratic governments. Do you think something similar could happen with techno-feudalism by progressive forces or social democratic forces? Although I must admit social democracy is somehow in retreat.
I'm afraid I have real bad news for social democrats, or for those people who place their faith in social democracy. It's gone. Just like the liberal individual is gone, the dream of social democracy has gone. It's gone a long time ago, social democracy, because let me remind our audience that, what was the golden age of social democracy? For me, it was a period when Willy Brandt in Germany, in West Germany, Bruno Kreisky in Austria, the Labour Party in the under Harold Wilson in the United Kingdom, the beginning of Mitterrand in France, Papandreou in Greece, they saw their role as politicians who would gather around the table the representatives of labor, trade unions on the one side, and of industry on the other. And they would broker a deal between them. And the deal would be that a chunk of the profits of the industrialists would go to the state to fund schools, universities, hospitals, social benefits, pensions, and so on. And another chunk would go to the workers to improve their situation, their terms and conditions. And that they did. And it was actually a civilizing, social democracy back then was a civilizing force. But after the end of Bretton Woods in 1971, you had the unshackling of bankers from all the restraints that had been placed upon them after the 1929 collapse. Under the New Deal in the United States, and then the Bretton Woods system, which put a lot of constraints on the bankers between 1944 and 1971. So the bankers were unleashed, and you had financialization. So you had a huge shift of power from the industrial sphere to the financial sphere. So once upon a time, in the 1960s, if you were head of Siemens in Germany or Krupp, you were the master of the universe. After the 1970s, you were the master of the universe if you controlled JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs or Deutsche Bank. And if you were industrialist, you had diminishing power, social, economic, political power, diminishing. If you were a banker, increasing, right? So at that point, it became impossible, even for well-meaning social democratic chancellors, presidents, prime ministers, to do the same thing that Willy Brandt and Kreisky and the rest were doing, to bring into a room industry and trade unions to cut a deal, because the power was no longer with the industrialists. A lot of that of their power had gone to the financiers. So how could you put together the representative of Goldman Sachs, which is American anyway, with the trade union of Volkswagen? It just wasn't possible. So instead of that original social democratic New Deal, people like Schröder, remember, the social democrat chancellor of Germany, and Tony Blair, and Mitterrand's second government, and Papandreou's second government, what they did was they cut a deal with the financiers. And the deal was really very simple. The trade unions were out. They were not in the room at all. The deal was between the Social Democrats in government and the financiers. And the deal was really very simple. The financiers demanded that they be left alone to do whatever they pleased. No constraints. They wanted to build huge pyramids of CDOs and CDSs and CDO squares and so on, all those toxic derivatives. They would let them do it. In return, a few morsels of their table, a small part of those huge financial rents that they accumulated on speculation, over speculation, they would go to the state. And indeed, if you think about it, Tony Blair, who let the City of London go crazy, absolutely mad, right? They let them get away with murder, effectively. But he did take enough money from them while everything was going upwards to fund the National Health Service in Britain. So that's a social democratic thing. It was coming from the profits of the finances, which were built on hot air. And when that hot air exploded, and the financial sector collapsed in 2008, those social democrats in government were no longer capable. They didn't have the analytical power or the moral strength to say to the bankers, okay, you blew it up, out of the way, we will nationalize the banks, we will salvage them, but you're out. So instead, they imposed huge austerity and printed money to give to the bankers. And that's the end of social democracy. Today, you have another shift. Remember how power shifted from the industrial sphere to the financial sphere. Now it's shifting to the sphere of the cloud capital. How can you have Jeff Bezos and trades unions sitting on the same table? It's even more absurd to imagine that than Goldman Sachs and trades unions. So the idea that you're going to introduce regulation, how can you regulate the owners of algorithms when the algorithms are not even understood by the people who actually designed them? That's the same with CDOs. Back in the day when Lehman's and JP Morgan were creating those CDOs, those very complicated financial instruments, the people, the mathematicians, the physicists who were actually building those instruments, those weapons of mass financial destruction, as Warren Buffett put it once, they didn't understand how they work. The things they were creating, they didn't understand. It's like a god who creates a creature and he doesn't understand what he has created, a bit like Frankenstein, actually. Similarly, with the people who actually build the cloud capital of the cloudalists, they don't really understand. So how can the state regulate an algorithm when the person who's actually designed it doesn't even understand? I mean, think about it. Now, the people who created Chat GPT-4 and now 5, right? They know how they made it, but they have no idea why it comes up with the answers that it gives you when you ask it things. The same people who created it don't understand. How can the government regulate? It's not a question of taxation. Taxation is useless now. Because firstly, you can't tax it. I mean, Jeff Bezos, Amazon has, last year, they had 44 billion euros revenues only in Europe. And they paid zero. Because their accountants are very good at hiding all profits as costs. So there's nothing you can do about it. Maybe you can introduce a digital tax at the point of sale as a percentage of revenues. But again, that doesn't stop the immense power of cloud capital to modify your behavior in mind. So to cut a long story short, I think that this is the revenge of the defeated left, of the defeated Marxist left, because I think we can now prove beyond reasonable doubt that the only way we can reclaim even liberal freedom is by socializing the algorithms, the means of behavioral modification, that part of capital that modifies the behavior. Now, how we're going to do that, that is a very big question, and it's a huge ask, but I insist that nothing short of that is going to return to us our capacity to be in control of our thinking, of our desires, and particularly of the way in which we live and communicate with one another.
Yanis, your dad showed you that everything that matters in life is pregnant with the opposite. And I would like to pick up your mind a bit on artificial intelligence in this respect. So from your dad's viewpoint, how would you see artificial intelligence nowadays in terms of wealth creation, in terms of innovation?
Artificial intelligence is yet another triumph of the human spirit. In the same way that, when we learned thousands of years ago how to create steel out of iron, how we managed to domesticate animals even before that, or to grow crops. These are all technological feats, technological triumphs of the human mind. But like every previous technological triumph, instead of liberating us, instead of turning the technology into our servant, we become servants of the technology. And that is, the dialectical twist. Same thing with artificial intelligence. It's a magnificent device. I love artificial intelligence. When I play around with translating AI bots or GPT-4, I'm really excited to be alive at the time when there's artificial intelligence. When I heard that AI has helped scientists in pharmaceutical companies and in actually university laboratories design antibiotics that kill the superbugs, which no other humanly designed antibiotic can kill, and save human lives, I'm all in favor of that. But the question, as always, regarding technology is who owns it? Because, it's like a nuclear bomb or nuclear technology. Who owns the nuclear technology? And what use are they putting it to? If they are putting it in order to, in the use of creating radioisotopes for treating cancer and making sure that most people survive cancer, that's a fantastic thing. But if they create it in order to build a nuclear bomb to blow us out of the water, of land, that's not a good thing. So I care about, the property rights. Who owns the bloody thing? The great danger of AI today is that it takes cloud capital, because we already have AI. It's not what will happen to us. It's already happened to us. Okay, Google, Zoom, which is what we are speaking through today, they're all run on AI. If you look now at the screen we have, there is an AI bot at the bottom of our screen here, which we could use to summarize what you and I are talking about. So it's already here. It's not what will happen to us. What is clear is that under the current structure and distribution of property rights over these machines and these technologies, we're going to have a much, much deeper poverty for the many, greater inequality. This is the first technology that is going to destroy more jobs that it is creating, because now it is attacking not just blue-collar work, but also white-collar work. Lawyers are going to be losing their jobs. So they're already losing their jobs. Doctors are going to be losing their jobs. There will be new jobs, of course, but the jobs that will be destroyed will be many more than the jobs that will be created for the very, very first time in the history of technological change. And the worst part of it all is that our conversation is going to be completely and utterly poisoned when the algorithms of AI are owned by people who have an interest in poisoning them. So, we already have deep fakes. No, you won't be able to rely. You won't be able to know what to believe and what not to believe. So, for instance, a simile of you will appear, waxing lyrical about whatever, some cause that you disdain. And it will be very, very hard for your audience to know whether it's a real you or a fake you. And when that technology belongs to the people who have a vested interest in poisoning the conversation, because they have a vested interest in preventing progressive politics from contesting their property rights over cloud capital, then, I believe that your program, your podcast is called the public square. There will be no public square.
Speaking about productivity and inequality and technology, you know that leftist thinkers and the economists, they have been advocating for economic models that are based on high productivity, on a very good educational system. Both our countries in the southern part of Europe are tourism-based economies. What would be your suggestions? How to maintain a balance between high productivity and technology?
Productivity is a very strange term in the sense that there are two ways of increasing productivity. One is to produce more output from given effort. The other one is, or given labor input, human labor input. Another one is to, just destroy labor. And as long as what labor is left produces a little bit, then again, the ratio of output to labor goes up. So, under Mrs. Thatcher in Britain, when unemployment went up from 750,000 to 4.5 million, productivity went up because so many people lost their jobs, but output did not fall as fast. That increased productivity. That's not a great benefit. It's not a great silver lining to society, right? As far as our countries are concerned, look, our countries, speaking as a Greek and as an Albanian, Serb, Macedonian, whatever, right? Our countries are in a process of desertification. We are becoming deserts. We are losing our people, the young minds that are worth their weight in gold or platinum or whatever. They are migrating. Our countries are being turned into the playgrounds of the global north. We are going to end up with nothing more than 5-star hotels and 5-star geriatric clinics and old folks' homes, so that our Norwegians and Germans and Swedes can come and spend their last years in a better climate, while we become a bit like Hawaii. I don't know whether you don't go to Hawaii if you haven't been, but if you go, you'll see in the big island, you'll see a beautiful place.
I wish you could say a little bit like California, but also it's Silicon Valley, and
It will be Hawaii because we are like the natives in Hawaii. They are increasingly displaced. They've been displaced from the coast. The coast is full of 5-star hotels. The Hawaiians are in the center of the island, living in slums. At 6 a.m, minivans go to their villages, to their slums. They take them. They transport them to the 5-star hotels, where the Japanese, German, American tourists in American, Japanese, German-owned hotels have a great time. The locals go there to clean their toilets, to cook their food, to sing Hawaiian songs and play Hawaiian guitars. And then at night, they're taken back to their slums. This is what's happening to the Balkans. This is what's happening to us because there's no investment in AI. There's no investment in green technologies. There's no investment. And when AI is being used, it's being used in order to deplete further any good quality jobs that we have.
My last question is in relation to Europe. You wrote recently a piece about Jacques Delors and Wolfgang Schäuble, which I have understood as two competing visions of Euro, but also of the economic and political model of Europe, that somehow is being projected and reflected also in the southern part of Europe. What would be your advice for leaders of the European Union or for our respective countries, how to organize the process of European integration in order to speed up the catching up process of our countries with the average of European Union? I know you have been very critical on this point, and I really would like to hear your analysis on that.
I wish you'd asked me that 5 years ago, before the 2019 European Parliament elections, in which I competed. And I competed in Germany to make a point that this should be a European political fight, not a national political fight. Because 5 years ago, I was a lot more optimistic. And 5 years ago, I had an enthusiastic answer to your question. My answer back then was that we need to learn from the Euro crisis. We need to learn that you cannot have a monetary union without having a fiscal union, without having a common investment policy, which does not depend on the national budgets of separate nation states. The M25 movement, we ran in 7-8 different countries with the Green New Deal for Europe, in which we were outlining the answer to your question, like, for instance, okay, we can't have federation now because it's really not realistic, but we can simulate a federation by having the European Central Bank supporting a large issue of bonds by the European Investment Bank, which can then become like 500 billion every year, which can then go into a common fund for green technologies to be spent and invested across Europe. How we can start the process of a constitutional assembly for thinking about federation, thinking about the pan-European constitution. These are all things that we were advocating in 2019, prior to the May 2019 European Parliament election. Since then, I must be honest with you, I think this is all pie in the sky. Europe has missed the boat or the train or the opportunity. I can't anymore. Even though I think that these things would work, I see no political process that is capable of making these things work anymore. And the reason is the pandemic. Because the pandemic proved to us that Europe can do a lot if it wants to. Not just Europe, but the United Kingdom, the United States. Remember we were being told by neoliberals that the state is kaput, it's finished. It's very fiscally constrained. There's not much you can do. It's already indebted. Just leave it to the market. And then you had the pandemic, you had the lockdown, you had the complete collapse of production in order to save people's lives and so on. I'm not criticizing, I'm just describing. And then the state comes in and replaces all the wages like this. Yeah, they print trillions. And it was all okay. So they proved that they can do it. The money tree is there. Yeah, they can pluck it if they wish. But they plucked it in the wrong way in Europe. They created the next generation EU, the so-called coronavirus recovery fund, which it was a wasted opportunity. Because it was a kind of funding that I was envisaging before 2019 as a green fund for the green investment and green energy in particular. And I was actually saying back then, it's a way of decoupling ourselves from Gazprom and Vladimir Putin. If we could create all this green energy through an investment of 500 billion a year every year for years. That didn't happen. And instead, they created the recovery fund, which is just corruption institutionalized. That's what it is, institutionalized corruption. So they got hundreds of billions of euros that they borrowed from the market, from financial markets, which is not a bad thing in itself, right? They could have had the European Central Bank provide the funding instead of buying Greek debt, for instance, which is ridiculous given the state of the Greek state. But anyway, so they borrowed all those 100 billions. And what did they do with it? They sat around the table and they said, okay, Italy, you get 100 billion. Greece, you get 40 billion. Spain, you get 80 billion, right? And who got those monies in the respective countries? The oligarchs. So essentially, this sounds strange coming from a Greek, but it was the European Union adding debt to the shoulders of the German worker, because the German worker pays the taxes, not the rich. The rich pay no taxes. They have, very good lawyers and accountants. They pay nothing. So the German worker had to borrow money on behalf of the Greek oligarchs. You just need to state that, to realize that this is a recipe for destroying the possibility of a proper European Union. Because this turns the Germans against the European Union. They don't want to hear about federation. They don't want to hear about consolidation or fiscal union. Because every time they hear the word more Europe, or the words more Europe, they imagine, okay, more taxes for me to pay for Greek and Italian oligarchs. So I'm afraid that Europe is gone. I think this European Union is kaput. I have no hope for this European Union anymore. And you can see that. I can see what's happening with Ukraine. The European Union has lobotomized itself. We don't have an opinion about anything. Whatever Washington tells us, we say. Huh? And that's it.
Thank you. Με ευχαριστώ.
Παρακαλώ πολύ.
It was fascinating to hear and talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.